So are Formula One drivers actually the best drivers in the world? I personally don't think so. Not that there aren't great drivers in Formula One, obviously. But to me, just because you're in F1 does not mean you by default are just at a much higher standard than every other driver in every other series, right? So for me, the best driver, right? And I don't mean Formula One driver, because that is a difference, right? If you're referring to, who's the best F1 driver, right? Who's the best IndyCar driver? Who's the best endurance driver, right? Or if you want to get more specific, who's the best WEC driver? Who's the best IMSA driver, right? So there's so many categories of racing, of disciplines. But to think that like, oh, if you're in F1, you're automatically the best, I truly do not think so. I mean, a big part of Formula One is its marketing to say it's the pinnacle of motorsports, right? Like it's the same way if the Indy 500, where it says it's the greatest spectacle in racing, that's just a thing that they coined, they trademarked, and they use it for marketing, right? Like there's no actual like, it's just what they said about themselves, So you can come up with your own opinion in terms of who you think is the best, right? So for Formula One, I think many people would say, maybe Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris, Carlos Sainz. In other series, you're gonna have your top drivers as well, right? Now, for me, what I look at as far as who I would say is I'm not gonna say the best, just who are really top drivers. To me, a simple criteria is gonna be one, you are like finishing in the top 5, top 3 in your own discipline, right? And then 2 is if you have to do at least one other discipline to be regarded as like a high caliber driver, right? Again, if you want to talk about who's the best IndyCar driver, okay, that's Alex Palou, Joseph Newgarden, whoever else is leading right now. If you want to talk about who is the best endurance racer, you have, Matt Campbell. Too many drivers for me to even remember or to talk about in this video. And then when you go to Formula One, like I said, you have your top 4 or 5, right? Now, like to me, a thing that I admire and I think is really cool of drivers is when they switch discipline, specifically when it's like back to back. So for instance, in IndyCar, right? Well, right now, who I think is the best overall driver in Formula One right now is gonna be hands down Fernando Alonso. Just because he's gone to Le Mans and won Le Mans twice. He's gone to, he attempted the Indy 500. He's done Dakar. He's done, like, you can put him, and you can say Max Verstappen of like, oh, he also does sim racing, and if you put him in any machinery, he's gonna do great. Most likely than not, yes, he's gonna excel at any car he's given. But until he actually gets in the car and actually competes with a different team that might not be at the highest caliber as he is, and he's in a 12-hour race, a 6-hour race, a 24-hour race, it's hard to really say like if he's gonna be great at that as well. So for me, like Fernando Alonso, just because he's very diverse in terms of his history in motorsports and like where he's actually competed, and he's also very competitive in F1 for 20 plus years, I think. So like something that's really cool is that like in IndyCar, you just had the Indy 500, right? Which is their biggest race of the year. And there's a lot of prep work that goes into that. The month of May is Indy 500, like that's what kind of overtakes everything. And then next month, you have the 24 hours of Le Mans, right? Now, the cool thing is that the two that I can remember off the top of my head is both Scott Dixon, who came in 3rd at the Indy 500, and Alex Palou, which I think he came in like 4th or 5th. They will also be driving in the hypercar class for Chip Ganassi in the, I think it's a Cadillac. They'll also be driving for that team in a hypercar at the 24 hours of Le Mans. So they have to go from focusing on the biggest race of the year, trying to win the Indy 500. And then, I don't know when they start prepping for 24 hours and when they start getting brought into the team meetings and when they start doing things, but they also immediately have to switch over to say, okay, now the biggest race next month is also happening, and that's a 24-hour Le Mans in France, and we have to now start prepping for that. All the meanwhile, there's still other IndyCar races that they're doing, right? There's a race this weekend, June 2nd, at Detroit street circuit or street track. And then there is the Road America, and so they have to go from they're racing in IndyCar and prepping for the Indy 500. And then after the Indy 500, which is their biggest race, they still have to do their calendar races. And then at the same time, they have to start getting integrated into the hypercar class for the World Endurance Championship to do yet another ginormous event that has all the eyeballs on the world on them. Like, to me, that is what I would consider like a high caliber driver. Like, it's very easy to like point at one series and say that driver is the best or one of the best ones. But when you think about everything in terms of like what other series there are, and if it goes from just open wheel to endurance racing to stock car racing, like that's when things start to get a lot more interesting, and you get to see the driver and just see how deep the bench is with their skills, or how diverse they are with their skills when they get on other platforms. And I do want to mention that like just because there's a Formula One driver, like you're driving in Formula One, it doesn't mean by default you're just some high caliber driver. It's applied in any series, any sporting organization, anything. Just because you're there doesn't mean you're like the best, right? Like that's just not how it plays out. I mean, I forgot what video it was, but they were referencing the NBA. It was a player, and he was saying like, of the however many teams that we have, about 30% of those are on the bottom end, and they're trying to get the best lottery, so they're not trying to win. Then you have the mid pack where they're just trying to develop their team, so they're still not really in contention. It's only maybe like 4 to 6 teams that like are really trying to make it to the championships. And it's the same thing within the drivers. Like, you think all 20 drivers can just like are able to win the championship? No, it's only but 4 or 5 of them that can like actually compete to like win the drivers or win the constructors championship. Like, that's just simply how it goes. Because I see a lot of comments on Instagram where specifically on IndyCar or NASCAR, but I'll keep to IndyCar because I watch that more. Of like, Joseph Newgarden had, Pat McAfee had asked Joseph Newgarden, hey, could you drive an F1? And Joseph Newgarden was like, oh yeah, of course, we'd rock them over there. And I was like, I already knew what the comments were going to be like, of like, oh, IndyCar is nothing but F1, F2 washouts. Any F1 driver can go and completely obliterate the competition in IndyCar. And I mean, a quick little example of that is Marcus Ericsson, Alexander Rossi, Roman Grosjean. They've all been in F1, and they didn't just come in there swinging and winning, like, not at all, actually. Then you have like, you have current F1 reserve drivers in there, Pietro Fittipaldi, I always say his last name wrong, Pato O'Ward, and again, like, Pato O'Ward is doing good, but like, he's not just wiping the floor left and right with all the other IndyCar drivers. So it's simply not the case. I mean, a big part of being in Formula One is the money part. Like, whenever people say Formula One drivers are the best in the world, and this is literally for every motorsport, but Formula One is like the most extreme. You have to say Formula One drivers are the best in the world with an asterisk that could afford it, right? Because like a team would rather take a driver that has B- driving skills but A+ backing and funding versus a driver that has A+ driving skills but has B- funding and backing, right? I mean, look at Liam Lawson. I think he fits in that. Oh, a lot of people fit into that boat, but like, he was factually performed very well when he debuted for Daniel Ricciardo, and he performed really well. But I don't think he brings the money like the sales that Daniel Ricciardo can produce, and that's just factually a big thing of it. Like Sergio Perez that brings Telcel, I forgot what it's called. But that's literally everyone, right? Like, everyone brings money, and if you can't bring the money or don't bring enough money, you're just simply not going to be looked at the same versus like someone else that like, we can grab him and bring in 2 million, but if we choose him, he brings in 10 million. It's simply the way it goes. So, I mean, if you took Logan Sargent and put him in IndyCar, would Logan Sargent wipe the floor of IndyCar? No. So if that's the case, then you can't say every Formula One driver can just beat everyone else, because that's simply not the case, right? I mean, Alonso tried to get into the Indy 500 and he didn't make it. Granted, yes, the teams he with and the terrible disaster all around, but he didn't make it into the Indy 500, right? It's not the way it works. We're like, oh, you're an F1, so you're automatically the best one. Like, look, Lance Stroll, right? Like, that's simply how it goes. And not only that, but Formula One specifically, it's more so of the car first, then the driver. Like, if you put Max Verstappen in a Haas, how good is he actually? Like, not that you take a skill away, but his skill cannot be complemented by the vehicle itself, right? Because it's not up to standard to complement his driving skills, right? You put Carlos Sainz in a Sauber, like what happens then? Is he still as competitive? I mean, look at Bottas. He was at Mercedes, always doing a 1-2 with Hamilton, and he goes to Sauber kick, whatever you want to call it. And now what? I mean, did he just all of a sudden just not be as good as he was before, or is it the vehicle, right? So it's always vehicle first, driver second, and there's nothing wrong with that. But like, if you're not given a competitive car, well, there's only so much you can do. So to me, Formula One drivers are great, but there's great drivers in every series. And to me, I try to look at their total portfolio of driving. What do they do, or what have they done? Like, to me, what's really cool is seeing endurance drivers. I probably hold those to a higher caliber, just because the amount of time that they drive in one given session, depending on the race, right? And depending what series, IMSA, WEC, because I think WEC's lowest or shortest race is 6 hours, and IMSA's, they have some sprint races in there, so it's not really endurance racing. But anyways, what do you think? Let me know in the comment section down below. Who is currently, or who is the greatest driver for you? Not specifically a series, but overall, who do you think is like a high caliber driver?